In the early 1980s, something strange was happening in Blackpool, England. TVR, a small British car company, had just been taken over by Peter Wheeler, a man who loved power and disliked anything that sounded like a compromise. The company had been building sports cars like the Tasman 280i, which looked fast but used a not-so-impressive Ford V6 engine. Wheeler wanted to change that. He wanted to drop a V8 engine into that same body and see what happened. That idea became the TVR 350i. The TVR 350i was first introduced in August 1983. It kept the sharp, wedge-shaped body of the Tasman, which had been designed by Oliver Winterbottom, a former Lotus designer. The shape was bold, almost like something from a science fiction movie, but under the hood was where things really got different. Instead of the old Ford engine, the 350i got a 3.5-liter Rover V8 engine. It had Bosch L-Jetronic fuel injection and produced between 190 to 197 brake horsepower at 5,280 revolutions per minute. Torque was around 220 pound-feet at 4,000 revolutions per minute. That may not sound like a huge number today, but back in the mid-1980s, that was serious power for a small car that weighed just over 2,200 pounds. The car had a front-engine rear-wheel drive layout. It used a 5-speed manual transmission as standard, though a 3-speed automatic was also offered for people who wanted to shift less and relax more, though that was rare. The 350i could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 6.3 to 7 seconds, depending on conditions and which version you had. Its top speed was between 130 to 138 miles per hour. The body was made of fiberglass, and the chassis was a modified steel tubular backbone from the Tasman. Suspension parts were borrowed from Ford, and the differential came from Jaguar. It was a Frankenstein of British parts, but somehow it worked. TVR built around 949 units of the 350 from 1983 to 1989. Most of them, about 869, were convertibles. Only 52 were fixed-head coupes, and an even rarer version, the 350i plus 2 with 4 seats, saw just 6 examples made. In 1990, to mark the end of the line, TVR released a special version called the 350 SE. Only 25 of those were built, each with a larger 3.9-liter engine and a few extra touches. The 350 became the base for even faster and louder cars like the 390 SE, 420 SEAC, and 450 SEAC. Some of those had engines bigger than most people's kitchens and even used carbon fiber and Kevlar to save weight. But the 350, I started it all. It helped TVR move from being just another small British company to becoming known for building wild, raw sports cars. Today, the TVR 350 is considered a classic. It might not be as famous as other sports cars from the 1980s, but it has its own place in history. And if you ever see one parked at a car meet, it might not look like much at first, but it definitely has stories to tell. Most people do not think of Reliant when they hear the word sports car. They might think of the 3-wheeled Reliant Robin tipping over in old comedy shows. But back in the 1980s, Reliant actually tried something very different. They built a sharp-looking 2-seater sports car. It had pop-up headlights, angular body panels, and a real chance to take on the small sports car market. This car was called the Reliant Scimitar SS1, and no, it did not fall over on corners. The Reliant Scimitar SS1 came out in 1984. It was built by Reliant Motor Company in Tamworth, Staffordshire, in the United Kingdom. Reliant was mostly known for odd little cars, but they had also built larger sports cars, like the Scimitar GTE. The SS1 was their attempt to make something smaller, lighter, and more modern. They wanted it to compete with cars like the MG Midget, which had gone out of production in 1980. So, Reliant saw a gap in the market and jumped in. The SS1's design came from a famous Italian designer named Giovanni Michelotti. This was actually the last car he designed before he passed away in 1980. Michelotti had worked with brands like Ferrari, Triumph, and BMW. But for this one, he came up with a wedge-shaped body, complete with pop-up headlights and sharp lines. The body panels were made of plastic, either polyurethane or glass-reinforced polyester. These were not for show. Reliant made them easy to remove and replace in case of damage. Underneath, the SS1 had a steel backbone chassis, a bit like the Lotus Elan. It had independent suspension all around. That means it could actually handle turns, unlike some of Reliant's older cars. The rear suspension had semi-trailing arms and coil springs. Nothing too fancy, but it worked. When the car launched in 1984, it came with a choice of two Ford engines. One was a 1.3-liter engine, and the other was a 1.6-liter version, both from the Ford CVH family. These engines were not powerful, but they kept costs down. Later, Reliant added a better engine, the 1.8-liter Nissan CA18ET turbocharged 4-cylinder. That version was called the Scimitar 180T, and it made the car feel like a real sports car. It could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 8 seconds. Not supercar fast, but not slow either. Inside the car, things were simple. It had the basics, a steering wheel, a gear shifter, and a dashboard with dials. Some parts came from other cars, like door handles from the Austin Metro and switches from the Ford Fiesta. Reliant did this to keep costs low and parts easy to find. Over the years, the SS1 went through a few small updates. In 1988, Reliant showed off a facelifted version called the Scimitar SST, designed by William Townes. It had a more rounded look, but still used the same chassis and engine options. By 1990, Reliant replaced the SS1 with a more modern car called the Scimitar Sabre, but by then the small sports car market had changed. The Mazda MX-5 had arrived, and that made life harder for the SS1. In total, Reliant built around 1,500 units of the Scimitar SS1. It never became a hit, but it showed that even small British companies could dream of making a proper sports car, even if the public mostly remembered their three-wheeled adventures. In the early 1990s, while most people were busy chasing Ferraris and Porsches, something unusual was happening in France. A small car company named Venturi was quietly building a sports car that many people have never heard of. It was fast, rare, and French. And it had a name that sounded more like a laboratory experiment than a car, the Venturi 260 APC. But once you dig into its story, you realize this car was more than just a strange name. The Venturi 260 APC was made between 1990 and 1996. It came from Venturi Automobiles, a company founded in 1984 by Claude Poirot and Gérard Godefroy. They were both car lovers who wanted to make a French grand touring car that could compete with big names like Ferrari and Porsche. Venturi was based in France and tried to bring together sleek design, performance, and comfort in one car. The APC part of the name stood for Avec pot catalytique, which in French means with catalytic converter. That might not sound exciting, but it was actually important. From October 1st, 1989, new laws in Europe required catalytic converters in cars over 2.5 liters in engine size. So, to keep up, Venturi made this updated version of their 260 model. Under the hood, the Venturi 260 APC had a 2.8-liter turbocharged V6 engine. It was a PRV engine, which stands for Peugeot, Renault, Volvo. Yes, that is 3 companies in one engine. It made 260 horsepower at 5,750 revolutions per minute and 410 newton-meters of torque at just 1,750 revolutions per minute. The car had a 5-speed manual transmission borrowed from Renault, and it sent power to the rear wheels. Even though the car weighed about 2,811 pounds, it could go from 0 to 62 miles per hour in around 5.2 seconds. Its top speed was about 168 miles per hour. The body of the car was made of fiberglass, which helped keep it light. It had pop-up headlights and a clean, sharp look. The drag coefficient was 0.31, which made it pretty aerodynamic. The car was 4,090 millimeters long, 1,700 millimeters wide, and 1,170 millimeters tall. The wheelbase was 2,400 millimeters. Inside, it had handcrafted leather and a focus on driver comfort. Venturi made only 188 units of the 260 series, and just 70 of those were APC versions. There were also other versions like the 260 SPC, which had no catalytic converter, and the 260 Atlantique, which was a lighter model. There was also a 260 LM, a special edition that celebrated Venturi's time at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Even though the Venturi 260 APC was fast and well designed, it did not sell in big numbers. Venturi struggled with money and eventually went bankrupt in the year 2000. But today, this car is remembered by collectors and car fans who love rare and strange machines. The Venturi 260 APC was a little odd, a little French, and definitely unforgettable. Most people in the 1980s were dreaming about Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and Corvettes. But in Riviera Beach, Florida, one man had a very different idea. His name was Warren Mosler, and he was not a car company executive or a famous engineer. He was a hedge fund manager, and in 1985, he decided to build his own car. Not just any car, something that could win races, go fast, be legal on the street, and still be different from anything else. The result was a strange-looking, lightweight machine called the Consulier GTP. It confused people, scared competitors, and annoyed race organizers, but it left a mark few people know about today. Warren Mosler founded Consulier Industries in 1985 in Florida. He was not happy with the performance of regular sports cars, so instead of waiting for someone else to fix it, he built his own. His goal was to make a car that was fast, light, and safe. To do that, he had to forget everything people thought they knew about how to build a car. The Consulier GTP had no steel or aluminum structure. Its body and chassis were made using layers of fiberglass, Kevlar, carbon fiber, and foam. There was no structural metal in the body. This made the car weigh only around 2,200 pounds. That is less than most compact cars today. It also helped to get better gas mileage, up to 34 miles per gallon on the highway. Under the rear hood was a Chrysler 2.2-liter turbocharged inline-4 engine. The early versions used the Turbo 2, making 175 horsepower. Later versions used the Turbo 3, which had a Lotus-designed 16-valve head and made 224 horsepower. All that power went to the rear wheels through a Getrag 5-speed manual transmission. Because of the lightweight body, it could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 5 seconds and had a top speed of around 155 miles per hour. The car's layout was mid-engine, rear-wheel drive. The weight was mostly at the back, about 63%. To keep things simple and cheap, it borrowed parts from other cars. The taillights came from a Chevrolet Malibu, and the door handles came from a Dodge Caravan. That made repairs easier, even if it looked a bit odd. It came in a few versions. The base model was the GTP Sport. Then there was the GTP LX, which was the fancier version. It had Recaro seats, a stereo from Alpine, Fittipaldi wheels, air conditioning, power windows, and even an optional car phone. There were also some rare Targa and Roadster versions. In total, only about 83 Consulier GTP cars were built. That included 20 race cars, 8 Targa tops, and 2 Roadsters. The car was very good at racing. In the IMSA Bridgestone Potenza Supercar Championship, it kept winning. The car was so dominant that it was given a 300-pound penalty. After that, it was banned from the series in 1991. It had become too fast for the rules. Warren Mosler even challenged anyone to beat the GTP with a street-legal production car. He offered $25,000. Car and driver tested the car against a 1991 Chevrolet Corvette. The Corvette won. But Mosler said the test was unfair because the GTP was worn out and not well prepared. In 1993, Mosler changed the company name from Consulier Industries to Mosler Automotive. The car evolved into new models like the Mosler Intruder, which had a 300-horsepower V8 engine from a Chevrolet Corvette and won endurance races. Then came the Mosler Raptor, which had a 446-horsepower engine and a split windshield that looked like something out of science fiction. Even though the Consulier GTP was not a sales success and never became mainstream, it was something truly different. It broke the rules and did not care about looking pretty. And in a world full of red Ferraris and loud Lamborghinis, sometimes it takes a weird wedge from Florida to shake things up. Most people think of Lotus as the small British car company that made sharp, lightweight cars with funny names and tricky electronics. But back in 1982, something a little different rolled out of Hethel, Norfolk. It was called the Lotus Excel, and this car had some unexpected help from Toyota. Yes, that Toyota. The one known more for making practical cars like the Corolla than anything wild. What came out of this odd British-Japanese partnership was not a supercar, not a rally monster, and definitely not a sales success. But it is one of the strangest forgotten cars Lotus ever built. The story begins in October 1982, when Lotus released the car as the Eclat Excel. It was based on the older Lotus Eclat, which itself came from the even older Lotus Elite. That is like making tea from a tea bag that had already been reused twice. Still, Lotus had an idea. What if they could take the old design, tweak it, and throw in some parts from Toyota to make it better? That is exactly what they did. By 1984, they dropped Eclat from the name and called it simply the Lotus Excel. This was not just badge swapping. Toyota gave Lotus some serious parts. The W58 5-speed manual gearbox came straight from the Toyota Supra Mk2, also known as the A60. The rear differential, drive shafts, door handles, and even some switchgear came from Toyota, and this actually helped the Excel become more reliable than most other cars Lotus made at that time. The Lotus 912 engine was a 2.2-liter inline-4 with double overhead camshafts and 16 valves. It made about 160 horsepower in the regular version. The Excel SE, introduced in 1985, had a high-compression version of the same engine that made around 180 horsepower. That gave it enough push to go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 7.2 seconds and hit a top speed of about 130 miles per hour. Not bad for a car with a fiberglass body and a steel backbone chassis. The whole thing weighed about 2,480 pounds. There was also an automatic version called the Excel SA, which used a 4-speed ZF automatic transmission. That one was more for people who wanted comfort instead of gear shifting. And in 1990, Lotus made a special edition called the Hethel 25th Anniversary Excel. Only 40 of those were made. They came with special paint, tan leather interior, and a better sound system. The Lotus Excel never made it to the United States. It did not meet their strict emission rules, and Lotus probably figured it was not worth the trouble. Over its 10-year production run, Lotus only built about 2,075 Excel units. As of 2021, only around 126 were still registered for road use in the United Kingdom. Despite all this, the Excel did manage to show up on Top Gear a couple of times. In 2010, James May turned one into a motorhome. In 2012, another one was made into a working submarine. It was not quite James Bond's Lotus Esprit, but it tried. Today, the Lotus Excel is cheap by classic car standards. Some sell for under £5,000 if they need work, while better ones can go for around £15,000. That is not bad for a rare British car with Japanese parts and a name that sounds like a spreadsheet.